Welcome to episode 165. I'm speaking with Cameron Smith, a lead compositor at Weta Digital, as well as working at studios like ILM and many others. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Allan McKay podcast. Allan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Allan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Allan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on allanmckay.com.
Have you ever sent in your reel wondering why you didn't get the call back? Or what was the reason you didn't get the job? Here's the thing. Most of us think you just put your latest work on your reel to some cool music and send it off, and then you get the job. A lot of us aren't aware that the majority of the reels sent to studios are skipped through and sometimes never even watched in the first place. The fact is, everything we were taught about landing a job as an artist is wrong. Over the past 20 years working for studios like Industrial Light and Magic, Ubisoft, Blur Studio, I built hundreds of teams, hired thousands of artists, and reviewed tens of thousands of reels. That's why I decided to write a book from the perspective of somebody that actually does the hiring. Learn the exact formula to captivate and qualify you as the obvious artist for the job, how to build a reel that ranks high on YouTube and attracts studios to you. The best part is with this book, you can get it right now absolutely free. Whether you're in design, games, TV, or film, go over to allanmckay.com/myreel. Okay, welcome to a brand new episode. So I'm really excited for this episode. I'm going to be chatting with a old friend of mine who I haven't actually caught up with since 2003, so 15 years ago. And this is a really fun episode, kind of backtracking through our careers a little bit, from Cameron's, where I initially worked with him when he was at his first job. And obviously watching his career skyrocket, and 15 years is a long time, but it was really interesting discussing how he actually got started and how he got his first job. There's some really great concepts that I think that you can borrow and you can kind of apply to what you're doing as well, thinking outside the box. There's a lot of really cool stuff there, but obviously talking about Cameron's successful career as well and all the things that he's accomplished. This is a really fun episode diving into a lot of the work he's done at Weta, which is primarily where he's been a lot of his career, as well as other studios and a lot of really amazing projects. Now, one thing I wanted to mention before we dive into this is if you haven't gotten the Ultimate Demo Reel Guide, get it now, as it won't be up for too much longer. Go to allanmckay.com/myreel. Now, this is a book that I've written specifically around all of the critical advice about building out your portfolio, probably the most important aspect to getting jobs and also getting work to come in without you needing to apply for work in the long term. In other words, your demo reel is everything. Now, the biggest problem with that is that a majority of the advice that's out there is specifically made by artists. And I think that there is a lot of misconceptions about what actually happens when they send a reel in. So I wanted to really approach this from someone who actually does the hiring. And on top of that, not only my perspective, but a lot of other managers and supervisors who look at reels and have the decision about who comes onto their team. So, like I said, this is a book specifically written by someone who does the hiring rather than artists sending in their work and kind of crossing their fingers and hoping that the things that they're doing are actually impactful in the decision-making process. So I think there's a lot of misinformation that can be very damaging being put out there. And I wanted to do this, again, from the perspective of someone who is a decision maker instead. So go to allanmckay.com/myreel to download the free book, as well as a 2-hour masterclass, which is also free, and a lot of additional videos and other high-value content as well. Okay, that being said, if you want to get the show notes for this episode, go to allanmckay.com/165, and you'll be able to get access to all of the key takeaways, quotes, everything that we discussed, links, all of that on the show notes webpage. Now, in addition to that, one last link I want to throw at you is that a couple of months ago, I put out a survey where over 10,000 people voted specifically for Venom being the next free crash course I wanted to put out. So this is something that I'm working on. It'll be out in a couple of days, but it's only going to be available for the next few weeks. So if you want to get access to this, it's entirely free, including all the assets, digital models, everything that comes with it, but only to those who are signed up to my inner circle. So if you want to get on the inner circle list, it's free. Go to allanmckay.com/venom and you'll be able to sign up there as well. So as I mentioned, the training is only available for a few weeks, so it's better to get in now while you can, rather than risk missing out or not having enough time to complete it. So go to allanmckay.com/venom, sign up there, and in the next couple of days, I'm going to be releasing all of the Venom training, which I'm really excited for. So that being said, let's dive in. Cam, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Cameron Smith. I am a visual effects artist that currently works at Weta. I'm primarily a lead compositor, but I've done a lot of different things in the past. A bit of lighting, a bit of on-set work, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's who I am.
I like it. That's awesome. I think it's the best intro ever. Actually, yeah, I want to dive into that too, because I totally stalked your IMDb and I didn't realize that you were doing a lot of lighting as well, which I think is pretty cool. And I guess when I first got to know you, you had been kind of dabbling in 3D as well as comp. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool that you are doing both ends of it. Yeah, I mean, just to start out, I mean, did you always want to work in film, like as a kid, or were you like, no, I'm going to be a ninja, or what was it?
I think everyone's had their I'm going to be a ninja phase.
I was going to be a T-Rex. I remember.
Oh, T-Rex? Yeah.
I remember announcing it to my family. I'm like, I've made a decision. I'm going to be a T-Rex or a crab, and then, or I'm going to be an author. And yeah, here I am making pixels instead.
Well, I think one of the earliest memories that I've had has been I remember rolling around on the floor when I must have been 3 or 4 or something, and on TV was an ad for these giant 4-legged robots in a snowfield, which was obviously The Empire Strikes Back, and I was like, "Ooh, that's really good." And I think I probably fell in love with movies at that point in time, and never really expected though to be able to work on them. Because I grew up in the middle of the burbs in Melbourne, Australia, and all these movies were being made in Hollywood. So I sort of loved movies forever, but went down a path of computer science and stuff. So I studied computer science after I finished high school. I got a degree in that, and halfway through that, I was like, computer programming. It's not really my thing. I don't want to do databases and all that sort of stuff. But during that time, I quite enjoyed doing a bit of graphics programming as part of the course, and then fell in with a crowd of people that were into doing short films, and
Cool.
Thought that sounded like a bit of fun, and got a hold of After Effects from somewhere, and started doing my first.
My good old buddy X-Force.
Yeah, maybe.
So where were you studying? Was it like Monash or something, or whereabouts?
I studied RMIT.
Okay.
And yeah, I was like, I think the point of doing computer science was I want to learn to program, because if I learn to program, then I can program video games.
Mm-hmm.
But then the entire course was not at all focused on anything that would help you do video games.
Right.
There wasn't even C. It was a different programming language called Ada, which is great for the military and and battles, but no good for blowing stuff up with laser guns.
But that's kind of cool. So so you kind of decided, like, your friends making short film, you wanted to help out, and you just started like looking around, like what software do people make movies with, and pick that up and kind of rolled with that, or how'd it work?
Yeah, because I guess also during high school, I was, I think Babylon 5 must have come out during high school, and
I'm like the one person who hasn't seen Babylon 5 or Battlestar Galactica.
Well, both of them are great. Babylon 5 is a great story. The CG is very primitive now, but it's still got quite a good story. And yeah, Battlestar Galactica is really good. So you should check those.
I'll have to at some point.
But they were all made with Lightwave, so I was like,
yeah,
can I get that? And I got a copy of that. Tried to figure that out, but
that's cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess from that point, like the more you dabbled in that, like when did you kind of realize that this is something you want to do as a career? Because I think a lot of people, they might look at something as a hobby and be like, oh cool, I'm good in Photoshop, or I'm making some neat stuff in Movie Maker. But for you, when did you kind of have that moment of hell yeah, like this is something I could actually get paid for?
Yeah, it was. Trying to think when it sort of switched. It was towards the end of getting the degree. I was not that into the idea of working for a bank or anything like that. So I started doing a little bit of web design stuff on the side. It was a little sort of maybe I can do that. Maybe I can be a freelance web guy. And again, through friends from the short films who also were in that sort of field of doing web type things here and there, we just sort of started collaborating on different projects. And then one guy in particular, a good friend of mine, Henry Gibbons, he does a lot of VFX in his spare time, but by trade he's a vet. So we sort of started doing these little short film things together, and then we thought we'd try and do a little business doing that with some of the people we knew. So we did a couple of late night TV commercials, and nothing particularly advanced, but actual work, actual paid work. And then I was like, all right, this is a thing that I want to do as a proper job, get
Right.
paid regularly, and ideally work on Lord of the Rings, because that was being made at the time.
Yep, that's right.
And then that led to me putting together a reel of the
Mhm.
various things that I'd done with the shorts and the paid work, and then sending that around to the various companies in Australia that I could find. Good old VHS demo reel, and spoke to a couple, and then eventually, ended up working at Cutting Edge.
So I'm kind of curious about that because, like, the way I recall, I remember David Pierce mentioning like your reel when it was sent in. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I am, but the way I recall was that you had, because you didn't have much work on your reel and you're applying as a compositor, which is kind of catch-22, because if you don't have work to show, then like what are you going to do? And you didn't have YouTube or stock or anything like that you could really work with back then. It was you, right, that you had like a bunch of stuff where you got like DVDs from Star Wars, things like that, and you would add elements in and replace things or whatever. Is that correct? Or
That is correct. I
I'm
made
just making sure in case like all these years like I've been like thinking of the wrong person and
No, that's totally me. Okay, we'll start going down the very nerdy fan.
No, I honestly,
rabbit hole.
I think this is brilliant, and I'd lie if I hadn't brought this up before. And like I've always just thought that it was so resourceful that you were able to do that, because especially a compositor, it's so easy to make the excuse that I want to be a compositor. Well, why aren't you being a compositor? Well, I don't have anything to composite. And it's the real go-getters, the real hustlers, the people who really want a job and want to get out there are going to go and hit up everyone who's shooting a short film or doing something wherever they can get material. And for you, and I won't give it away, but like you created your own material. You looked at what you had and you were able to utilize that. You're doing 3D, 2D, and I thought that was just brilliant to kind of take that initiative and go down that path. So anyway, I'll let you elaborate from there.
Yeah. So basically, a friend of mine, he went to work on Star Wars 2, Episode 2 in Sydney, and during that time,
I remember that. I was meant to be the effects soup on that, but then they decided last minute that ILM would do all the previs.
yeah, I think they underbid you, perhaps. Um, and he was there, and at some point during the shoot, some guy, some editor, I think in the States somewhere, released a fake Episode 2 trailer using footage from various films, and it created a bit of a buzz and fooled all these people into thinking it was a real deal. And everyone on set of the movie was looking at it. That's how he found out about it. He said, "What's this thing? You should do one." And I looked at it and I was like, I kind of know all these movies straight away. How is anyone fooled by this? It's kind of, it looked like it had come from various VHS sources, and it just sort of, it's like didn't really convince me at all. So I thought, well, I wonder if I could do anything a bit more elaborate. So I thought I'd do my own fake episode 2 trailer and grab shots from various movies the same way this other guy had done it, but actually kind of spruce them up or do things. So like take a battle, I think it was a battle scene from Highlander 2 that I took and I put lightsabers on all the swords because that had that sci-fi battle at the start, and then they were releasing little images from the set of episode 2, just little still photos, quite low res, but that didn't matter because what I thought I could do with those, I'd take those still photos and then I could maybe roto, I could roto like Obi-Wan off a plate from episode 1 and comp him onto the photo from episode 2, or render Slave 1 onto a shot from Judge Dredd. So I'd get a shot from Judge Dredd of a mysterious prison world. It's all almost like a Borg cube type. It's pipes and stuff. I camera track that and I put the 3D Slave 1 flying between them, and just sort of tried to be as elaborate and non-specific about stuff as I could. And I think the one that our departed producer at Cutting Edge liked the most, which was a last-minute thing that I threw in there. I was like, "Oh, we just do this." I had a background from episode 2, I think, and then I knew Christopher Lee was going to be in episode 2 as someone, so I rotoed him out of a shot from Sleepy Hollow and put him on the background, and then I saw a picture of Christopher Lee from episode 2, and he had a beard, but he didn't have one in Sleepy Hollow, so I I cut out the beard off the photo and tracked it onto his face, and I think that was the actual shot that probably
that's exactly it. Yeah,
it was such a throwaway last-minute thing as well. So,
but that's what I thought was really interesting was the fact that you're adding beards to shots. I think the way I recall, and again I might be wrong, but you're adding some 3D elements into. Again, could be wrong, but I just thought it was kind of brilliant that you took that initiative and you're able to have elements from something, when back then, because like I wouldn't be doing that, but like not having YouTube or anything like that, I'm constantly looking at footage from DVDs because it's the only thing that was polished that we could get access to. So I think it's like Jurassic Park 3 had a really great top-down shot of a speedboat, so suddenly you're like, wow, like look at that foam, I could use that as a map or whatever. And so I feel like the poor man's YouTube back then was just pulling footage from DVDs, and let alone using it as a place to composite and play around. I think that was really cool.
Yeah, it was a fun challenge. It was all After Effects, and I think it was all Lightwave as well. So it was a bit of camera tracks, and I think it was all. It wasn't proper lighting. I think it was just sort of IBLs based off the plates to make it kind of quick and easy. But I didn't have quick and easy in terms of like still like a day to render something because didn't have any decent hardware to do it. But that doesn't really matter, right? It's like
that's right. So
use what you got.
Going to Cutting Edge, I mean, back then we're rocking out in Shake. I think we had just moved to Apple as you would come in, which was the death of Shake, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, what was it like for you, like kind of going from doing this more as a hobby or more, on the side to, going to the glorious, amazing feature films that we're doing at that time? I turned down The Matrix to work on fucking George of the Jungle and Inspector Gadget. Like, who does that?
I don't know. A friend of mine turned down doing the baby on The Matrix as well. He was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And then he saw it. He's like, "Oh."
That's the stuff that Mannix did. That was brilliant. So for you, what was it like kind of going there and getting to work in, I guess, the first kind of, proper studio at the time, like doing all that kind of stuff?
It was quite scary. Because it was Queensland and I was from Victoria, so it was like
you might get a suntan. Watch out.
Yeah, it's like, well, not the hours that I worked, I guess, but it was like, okay, I have to pack everything up. Well, I don't have anything, so that's easy. But I won't know anybody over there, and this is kind of like, oh, I've wanted to do this, and now it's time to do it. But am I kind of good enough using Shake? I've never even used that before, so it was quite a nervous but exciting kind of time. So and they started me off on a on I think it was a 6-week trial, perhaps, which I thought was pretty fair, actually, for someone with no real experience in the field. So I went up there. I did the night shift, basically. I think it was. Yeah, it was the night shift. So I sort of came in
Yeah,
after
you and Kate
everyone was
came in as the junior compositors, kind of starting out, and both of you, like, that's what I really liked, is that you guys managed to kind of pick up the pace and like rock things out really quick. So kind of went both from junior to being more like a mid level, like, very quickly.
It was what did kind of sort of bum me out a little bit about the night shift was, quite lonely by yourself. But when I got there, everyone was sort of wrapping up for the day, and everyone was playing Counter-Strike. It's like everyone's having their fun end of the day, getting the good vibes going, and I sort of come in and I'm like, oh, be here by myself or whatnot for the next 6 hours or whatever it was. But it was good because I can't remember if Shake was new for the Edge at the time, or if it was literally like you just got the max.
No, we'd been using it for quite a while. Since about late 2000, I think, or about then, and then or early 2001, and it's just then Apple had acquired it, so then we had to get Mac hardware, which changed everything, because instead of having a floating license, you could just jump on and slap your shots together. It meant that we literally had licenses just enough to cover the compositors. So it's kind of affected things pretty drastically, because you only have like 3 or 4 licenses for the whole studio, instead of anyone being able to pick it up and jump in and do your thing.
Gotcha. But I never used it, so the first couple of days, maybe a week, it was like, okay, how do I use this thing? This node thing that has no layers.
Very different After Effects.
So it was a pretty steep kind of and rapid learning curve, but I quite loved it. And I still love like a node-based compositor. It's so much more flexible. And then we just got into it. I can't remember if George of the Jungle 2 was running at that point in time, or if it was TV commercials and stuff being the first things that I got to do. But I did my first 6 weeks, and they were like, "We want to keep you." And I think I transitioned to the day shift at that point in time, which made everything easier.
Yep, means we could go out and drink at night.
That's right. And and then it was like 1 year of just like full-on work on both George of the Jungle and just TV commercial after TV commercial. And I think thinking back on it, I think that's probably the best way it could have gone, because as brutal as the TV world is, or was at that point in time, such a good way to learn how to do so many different things, because you got to do it, you got to make it work, and then you got to move on to the next thing. You can't sort of waste time meandering through a shot. You actually just have to get it done.
No, I think that's like a really good point, is that starting on commercials, I think, is always the best way to go, because feature films, you can noodle away in a shot for quite a long time, and you're not really going to get that exposure. Whereas with commercials, usually they're going to be rapid fire, a 2-week turnaround. You don't have time for a nice pipeline. You got to do whatever it takes, and every project has its own challenges. So I think you really get like the most growth on, like, let's say a year or 2 of commercials versus a year or 2 of film is going to be drastically different when it comes to the outcome, because by the end of that, you've probably worked on 40, 50 commercials, and the exposure you go through, the failure you go through, everything that you go through during that time, you get the most growth for sure.
I kind of don't miss commercials, but do miss it because it did change all the time, so you never got bored of looking at the same shot for like 6 months. But the turnaround was pretty rough.
I just got a call today about a certain Marvel movie that is coming out very soon, and they're like, "Hey, we need some help," and I'm like, I don't know, because I'm going to Vegas in 2 weeks. They're like, "Well, the project's due in a week, so can you come down?" It's like, okay, well, I guess it doesn't affect my Vegas plans, but it's, 1 week on a Marvel film is, especially obviously, knowing which one it is, it's going to be pretty brutal. Yeah, but so I guess, the worst combination is when you got feature films with TV commercial deadlines.
Yeah, that's not ideal.
The other thing that you brought up, which I thought was kind of interesting, is just starting out, like moving to a new city, and like the thing that we all want for so long, and you're kind of like working so hard to get it, and you finally get it, and then there's that kind of fear that sets in for a moment of like, oh shit, like I've wanted this for so long, and can I actually do it? Like, is this suicide? All the kind of, I think it's very natural for all of us to have that little bit of self doubt in the beginning when you've worked so long to get something, but finally it arrives, and then it's kind of the reality of like, well, do I really want this, or am I good enough, and all those kind of dilemmas that we mentally kind of wrestle with a little bit before we dive in.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be things like that you're afraid of, I guess, or you have concerns over. But you just gotta sometimes you gotta do it and see what happens. As long as you don't
Don't mess up.
don't mess up, or like don't burn your bridges on the way, kind of thing. And give yourself a little bit of a safety net or a buffer if you can.
Yeah.
It's always easier to do it when you're like 20 than when you're like 40.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You don't have responsibilities, so yeah. It's like when you're young, I guess, and starting out, just move around as much as you can.
So I'm just curious too, like at Weta, how many people from The Edge are there these days? Because I mean, you got Sam Cole, you got Dave Clayton. Just trying to think of who else. Obviously, James Bennett went over there for a while, but it seemed like a lot of Edge people kind of ended up over that way.
Yeah, I think most people made a stopover on their way to other places. Some, came back. I think James came and went, and then came back again and went again. Murray Smallwood has had a couple of visits early on in my time there. But I think now there's a heavy contingent of fuel people over here now. That I think Sam might have been the first one, but there's a whole bunch of those guys over here now. I think Photon comes up every now and again, but I think there's now like 1,500 people here. So there's a percentage probably of people from every company.
That's a good point.
Now.
No, it's cool, man. And yeah, I mean, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but for you going from Cutting Edge, where obviously you kind of got to sink your teeth into a lot of projects and kind of get your feet wet there. You went from there to Weta, is that correct, or where do you go next?
That is correct. I think around the year mark of my time at Cutting Edge, it was like, okay, this is cool, but this is not sustainable for me. Like, so I started thinking about what to do, and I think Dave Clayton might have been the first guy to come over to Weta from Cutting Edge.
Yeah, you did. Like end of 2 Towers, I think.
Yeah, I think it was early mid 2003, and I was like, oh, I'd really like to do that. And then I think basically it was Richard's contacts at Weta that got me the line, got me a way in. And I think Murray also came over as well, just before me. So just through the people who were already here and the fact that they were obviously needing people, I was like, all right, time to do it.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, for you going from, let's say, a smaller studio like Cutting Edge to going to Weta, I mean, workflow-wise and everything else, I mean, how much of a culture shock is that for you to kind of go into a studio that obviously is much larger and doing larger things?
Big changes. I don't even remember if Cutting Edge had any sort of real pipeline or tracking thing. I don't even remember how we got shots to work on, and then I feel like we were probably just told this is what we're doing and here's where the renders go.
Pretty much. You search for a shot on you type his name in and search across the network.
Yeah, CD shot 5.
That's right.
Like and then you get to Weta and you've got like I went to Roto Paint did a little bit of comp as well. But you get there's a department of like say 20 people just doing roto paint, not 20 people doing the entire project. And they've got their sort of managers, and then there's like the VFX soups and the producers, and there's all these different people, and then there's an actual production tracking database and intranet pages and this cool shot sub thing that lets you see all the clips and the submissions from everybody. Like the shotgun media player, I guess.
Yeah.
And just all this tech and all these things plugged into Shake and these fancy pants reviewing stations, and it was like, whoa, this is like a real movie company thing going on. Props from the movies on the walls. It's like that was quite a fun thing, but also again another like, oh, this is another step up. This is like,
yeah,
this is all more things to learn about and how to actually work on film, because I never worked on actual stock film before. So there's you got to bring in your 2K plates, and you got to put neutral grades, and you got to deal with noise and denoising and all that sort of stuff, which you don't have to worry about on like a standard definition video that comes off a
straight
Betamax
DVD
or
release.
something.
I always kind of think it's interesting too. I mean, I think that the most valuable thing going to larger studios isn't necessarily like, okay, cool, now I'm at a big studio, that'll be good in my resume. It's more getting exposure to just amazing talent, and just as you were kind of explaining, I mean, getting to go work with people who have been doing this for quite a long time, or even have been kind of pioneering a lot of the workflow standards. So for you, I mean, did you get a lot of growth in those first couple of years, like going from, let's say, Cutting Edge to Weta?
Yeah, like definitely. Like there was and there still is such a I guess a talent pool, a brain trust of just like amazing artists and technicians and just everyone at Weta is really, really good and great people to work with, and it's like, okay, so I'm this new guy that's rocked up. He's done George of the Jungle 2 and a couple of Holden ads. He's big stuff, in Brisbane, sit next to people that worked on like Starship Troopers and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Unless you're like, oh, okay, so I'm not really that special from a film point of view, but you could just ask them things. You're like, I'm new here, like, how do I do this? Oh, you could do this, and blah blah blah. And just the whole time, everyone I've ever dealt with at Weta has been really talented and open and helpful. And it's kind of that thing of, if you don't know something, you just ask, because, as talented as the person next to you is, they don't know stuff as well, So it was great, and it still is a great sort of learning place and time.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was your first project there? I'm guessing it was Return of the King?
It was Return of the King. It was, I think it was the last 3 weeks, not 3 weeks, 3 months of the show, when it was like fully racing towards the deadline, and I was like, okay, welcome, here's your hotel room, now get to work.
Here's your hotel room. You won't be seeing this very often. I actually did that. I was in Berlin, and I had friends visit me, and I let them stay at my the apartment that this studio gave me, just because I hadn't been in my apartment in several weeks. It's like sleeping on the floor next to my desk. So, you're basically getting a place for your friends to stay when they visit. But yeah, like, that's really cool. And I guess like having that goal or that dream of wanting to work on Lord of the Rings and actually getting to do it, I think would be pretty cool as well.
I think the story a friend of mine likes to talk about is I think during when Fellowship was first announced and they released their first teaser kind of thing that had Peter sort of talking about the tech and, now's the time we can make it sort of thing. We were watching that at my place being, woo, how exciting would this be to work on? And then and then there I am like 3 years later, I'm like, oh, I'm actually working on shots that have Gollum. Woo.
It's pretty cool.
So it was quite cool, and I still feel quite fortunate to have made that jump when I did. And then And then that sort of finished, and it was a great time, big parties, everyone was all very happy. And then I was like, oh,
What now?
what now? They've finished up. What's Weta doing? Nobody knows because they've all been focused on Return of the King, and then like the place kind of emptied out. After that, I think there was even like questions: is Weta Digital still going to be a thing after Lord of the Rings? And I sort of I think that's when I tried a bit of work up in Auckland for a little bit.
At
And
October?
October.
Mhm.
And then I went and worked at Fuel for a little bit, doing a couple of ads there with Sam, and I don't think
They're
there was anyone else there.
they're a good bunch of
From
guys. I really like at least like let's say 2005, 2006 Fuel.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I probably would have been popping in there a little bit because I was on set for Superman. We're shooting that down at Fox in Sydney. So
Oh yeah.
I was occasionally popping over there to hang out with Burnstock and all those guys. But yeah, I mean, so that's pretty cool. And like, I guess like you have spent a lot of time at Weta over your career, and like for you, what do you think are some of the more challenging projects that you have worked on, and what specifically about them?
I think the two most challenging slash highlights, I think, of them all have been Avatar, which was I spent a good solid year on that one, doing all the sort of being kind of like the comp lead on all the floating mountain stuff,
Mhm.
where Jake gets his Banshee for the first time.
Yep.
And that was challenging for lots of reasons. One, because it's photorealistic, full CG, James Cameron epic, but because the tech required to do it in stereo was pretty new. We had a custom version of Shake that could do stereo, and then at that same time, Peter Hillman and I can't remember who else were sort of implementing the whole deep compositing workflow
Yep.
that I think has been one of Weta's key
Yeah, changed everything for you guys.
advantages over the last 10 years, I guess, almost.
Hmm.
Um, so it was like, okay, there's this deep thing. How do we use that? How do we use that in Shake? Okay, how do we do simple things like A over B's? Okay, you got to do this. All right, we need to do this. All right, we'll need to code something. So Peter would change something or make something, and then roll out a new version, and we'd sort of um, battle test that, and it just sort of opened up all these new ways of working and ways of thinking about how to comp shots together, and new problems, of course. But that was just getting one's head around that and how to use that effectively was a big kind of, again, sort of uh, level up on everyone's skills. And then
Hmm.
there's a whole bunch of other things I was doing on that. I was actually sort of trying to render clouds out of one of the custom 3D tools that Weta's got for clouds, and just sort of expanding my skill set with all that. And then more people started coming on, so it was sort of leading and guiding the sequence with all the
Cool.
other talented supervisors and stuff. So that was a big one, and a fun one, and a great one to have done. And the other
So
one,
just to segue for a second and just
yep,
remember what the other one was for a moment.
yep,
But yeah, I was curious, like just to dive into the whole deep compositing, because again, yeah, everyone I know like who comes back from compositing over at Weta is just they go back to Nuke and they're just depressed because they click the deep thing and there's like two nodes pop up and it's just obviously you have like hundreds of nodes and like all this control and like do you want to talk a little bit just about some of the benefits of like working in a deep workflow?
well, the benefits are that, like, the primary benefit I see is nothing's baked in. Like in traditional sort of comping, you've got a character standing on the floor. Okay, that's really easy. It's A over B. But if you're standing behind a rock, then either you need to hold out the character from the rock so that when you put the character over the background, he'll be behind the rock, or you have to hold out the character from the background so you can put the background over the character. And that's fine, But if you're constantly having to re-render both things because you're changing animation, you're wasting a lot of render cycles. Whereas with Deep, you just have to render the elements separately, and if one of them changes, you don't necessarily have to update the other one. Now, if the character in that situation, if his arm animation changes, then you wouldn't have to render the background again at all. But if he moved position completely, his shadows would be different, so you'd have to render both those passes again. But you've sort of saved a lot of render time by just not having holdouts baked into anything. And then on top of that, there's a whole bunch of extra data that can go along with the renders, and I think that's where the bigger facilities have an advantage with Deep, is they can
Push a lot of data.
Push more data. They can use it in ways that are very custom or user driven, to help you generate like mattes or recolor things or relight things, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's two things. It's the basic kind of advantage of Deep, but then it's all the other stuff that Weta has put on top that make it really, really fun to work in. It has a downside of weight, I guess. All the files are much larger. So
I still remember, like, you'd be working on a network, and it's very comp heavy, so there's like 8 megabyte Targa files, and it's just like, all right, like, everyone's going to stop what they're doing because they can't save a file because too many people are pushing around these small little files compared to like I do a lot of grading where I'm pushing 8K R3D files, and you're looking like a gigabyte just for a colored frame.
And you think about that, but then like so much worse, because if it's just like a character on a background, that's not bad. But most of the time you got a character on a background and there's a fire and there's smoke everywhere, and as soon as you add sort of volumetric data, that makes the files even bigger. So it's kind of like, to some degree, I think it's only the big facilities that can deal with Deep in this way, because they have the coding tech, but they also have the infrastructure, the networking, and the caching sort of ability that you at home won't necessarily have.
That's right. No more After Effects compositing. So what was the other challenging project?
That was it's a little thing. I don't know if you would have seen at all. It's just that sort of Disney logo that's been on the front of every Disney movie for the last
that's cool
10 years or whatever. That we did at Weta for, I think it first premiered with Pirates of the Caribbean, and that was a great thing to have worked on, because again, it was such talented such a talented team of people across the entire company, and it all sort of started with some concept art done by Michael Pangrazio, who is the art director at Weta Digital, and he did this great concept art, and it was really good. And then we were trying to make it look as close as we could to that artwork, and getting all these little fun little details dressed in there that Disney wanted in there. And this was sort of, I think it was the director of possibly Aladdin or Lion King, who was one of the directors of the
I can imagine that piece would get a lot of scrutiny, just because it's something that's going to represent Disney for quite a long time. So I'd imagine they're going to be like, yeah, whatever. It's going to be like, it's like everything.
Lots of things, but also just like fun things. Like there's the castle is like an amalgamation of all the different castles of the various different parks. So it's got like maybe the turrets from Euro, and then the tower from Tokyo, and all these different pieces. And then in the background, right before the end of the shot, there's a yacht. It's like, what's that yacht in there for? Well, that's a yacht. That's Roy Disney's yacht. We put that in there. And then there's like the train at a specific, relevance that I can't think of at the moment. But it was just such a fun, a really hard project. There was a lot of late nights with me sitting with Michael in front of Shake, just trying to get the color levels just right. But that was the other like highlight, I think, of my time at Weta so far.
That's great. That's really cool. And yeah, I mean, jumping around a little bit, you went to ILM as well, so you're working in SF?
No, I ended up doing that. I went to Singapore for that one.
Okay, cool. What was it
Which
like?
was,
Sorry to cut you off. Like, I was just gonna say, like, what was it like at that time? Like, obviously, having spent quite a long time at Weta to kind of decide to make that shift to jump over there.
it was a bit of a time for a change of a few things happening outside of Weta that made it a good kind of time to
Hmm.
try something different. So we sort of went over there, and my then girlfriend, now wife, we went over there, and we sort of spent a year and a bit there working and sort of traveling and just doing lots of fun little different things. And like ILM wise, it was interesting to sort of compare pipelines and their way of doing things versus the Weta way of doing things.
What do you think? Like,
And
how do you just to focus on that for a second? Like, what are your thoughts on that comparing the two workflows and how? Like, what's like with using Nuke there as well? Because I mean, I highly doubt they would have thrown Saber at you to comp on.
no, I think they were early-ish in Nuke, or there was something about, I think they were just in the latter stages of the transition, I think, to Nuke. So there was some things being rolled out when I got there to help with just sort of rendering and such. So it wasn't as fully featured, I guess, as Weta's implementation. And I can't remember anymore what their production tracking system was like. I think one of the things that struck me when I got there at that point in time was ILM's documentation
Mm.
and the way they sort of kind of had lots of reference material and descriptions on the projects and how things are going to be done and who's
Lots
doing
of
it.
elements, that's for sure.
Lots of elements. I quite enjoyed the element library. I'm like, oh, that's the Death Star blowing up there. Can I use that in anything? Probably not. And I think they certainly at the time they were more focused on the what makes a shot look good versus what makes it look technically accurate, I guess.
Hmm.
I think they're a bit more open to. At that point in time, I think Weta was quite, more about getting it right in the render and making it sort of,
Hmm.
perfect from that point of view. Whereas ILM was far more like, here's some passes, just comp it together and make it look good.
Yeah.
And,
Who
and
are the soups that you typically deal with?
at ILM,
Hmm.
um,
I'm just curious because, like, I feel like depending on which supervisor you deal with, like what you're just saying, yeah, it totally changes. Like John Knoll, he'll completely disregard a shot and focus on like the how good the spec is, and just all these things that are visually going to make the shot work. Like to him, it's all about that. Whereas you look at Murin, it's definitely more about composition, and how the whole shot's coming together. It's kind of interesting just to kind of see the diversity depending on who you work with.
yeah, I think that's definitely definitely a supervisor kind of a flavor of a particular supervisor
Hmm.
is what they sort of focus on. It was Transformers, so it would have been Scott Farrar on the San Francisco side, I think, and
Hmm.
what else was there? Battleship. I can't remember. It's too long ago. It's too long ago, and there's been too much wine in between then and now
Good.
to remember. But I think all of the ones that I got were more of the whatever looks good
Hmm.
type of thing. But what I did find there was the workload was much lighter,
Hmm.
and I don't know if that was because that was the particular ILM scheduling thing, or just because that was the sort of start of Singapore becoming
Yeah, rather than
its own thing,
Lucasfilm.
rather than just a subsidiary of the San Francisco sort of office.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know how it is now. Maybe it's a lot busier now. But
Yeah, I feel like around that time that you're talking about, like 2010, 2011, especially, like ILM went through so many growths. Like even as more me witnessing it from the outside, just being at a few companies that were outsourcing to them, and then just in general, like I think for them to adapt and be able to stay on top, they kind of went through a lot of growth spurts trying to figure out like how do we compete with studios who are using out of the box software that are literally underbidding us by 10x, and and I think that in the end, the model that is sustainable for them has kind of been to have a global presence and to have Vancouver, to have London, to have Singapore, to have obviously San Francisco as well. And by having that everywhere, they can kind of take on everything rather than being more selective and charging a lot and only having a certain amount of projects per year. So yeah, it's definitely shifted around a lot, and I think that as you mentioned, like before that, the Lucasfilm Singapore was more of an outsourcing place. It'd be getting cheap labor. It wasn't really its own place, and then that's around the time I think 2011 when it kind of became ILM Singapore, and then obviously started to bring in a more international crowd rather than it being as focused on just being the cheaper area. It's more like, okay, well, now we have more of a Southeast Asia presence that we can bring in artists from all over the world, and even especially for the US where it's a lot more difficult to get visas and work permits to work. It's a lot easier to go for some countries to Singapore to work out of there.
Yeah, I think that sort of sounds about right. I think whilst I was there, they started to move the pipeline development to Singapore as well, I think. So they were definitely like making lots of changes, and that was in the old building as well. It wasn't in the new building. They struck ground on the sand crawler whilst I was there.
I don't know how you could handle the heat there. I love Singapore. The place is amazing, but yeah, it's so freaking hot that like you go to take a photo and you got about 3 seconds from when you take the lens off, like the lens cap off, to take the photo before it starts fogging up. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And a few of those. I think the key there was like you just kind of get used to it after a while, and you only do your chores between like 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning, or like 5 and 7 at night when it's actually kind of cool, and you just don't do anything during the midday, or you stay inside.
But yeah, so like going from there, like again, just going through a bit of your work history, but you going back to Weta after ILM. I mean, again, going back to places that you worked before, what was it like returning? Was the position that you were taking on similar, or do you take on more of a lead role at that point?
It was sort of it wasn't it was similar. It wasn't sort of going up the ladder, as it were. And it was interesting because when I came back, it's like the whole pipeline had almost changed. Like all this extra cool stuff had been implemented in comp to make the whole sort of managing of assets easier. And there were all these new people, and they were doing more shows at once. So it was actually kind of not like coming into a new company, but it was definitely different, and that was in such a short time as well. I can't remember what they'd done. I think it was because it was Tintin, probably. They crewed up for Tintin, and had other things going on. The Hobbit would have been kicking off at that time as well. So I came back and did some comp on Hobbit and
Apes, because they were both going on at the same time.
I didn't work. I got back after the first Apes was done, I think. I did Hobbit and Iron Man and Man of Steel, and after that I was like, I'm gonna actually try my hand at this lighting thing. So
yeah. So what's that like? Deciding to go from comp into doing more lighting and 3D. Like, why did that intrigue you? And was it easy to switch departments?
I guess one of the things on, I guess, Avatar was because it's an all 3D movie. So much of an all rendered movie, I should say. A lot of decisions are all made in the render, and they sort of come out of the render and they look really good, and that's sort of where I guess the art directing primarily happens, particularly in simple kind of drama sequences that don't really have any effects or things exploding or stylistic things you have to worry about. So it was partially driven by the fact that I wanted to try my hand at sort of art directing the shots in a all CG sort of production, and just sort of try something different. You do the same thing for too long, you get a bit stale or becomes a bit repetitive, and just kind of to understand why sometimes it takes forever to get a new render. It's like, why I just want there's a new animation, why haven't I got the new render already? And then you sort of realize, I learned I learned
Hmm.
pretty quickly why sometimes it takes forever to get a render out of lighting, and it was again, it was a learning curve, pretty sort of steep learning curve, because as much as I'd used Maya as a utility to get sort of geo into Nuke or something like that, I hadn't really used Maya as a
Right.
3D rendering kind of package.
What were you rendering with?
Initially, it was RenderMan,
Hmm.
and then for Hobbit 3, might have started using Manuka,
Okay.
which is their in-house renderer. I think it was Hobbit 3 that we started using Manuka full time. Which again, you get used to using it one way with RenderMan and having to pre-cache all this sort of spherical harmonics and all this other interesting and fun stuff, and then you switch to a new renderer and you have to just kind of
Hmm.
relearn all that side of things again.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while, and then ended up popping back to Melbourne for a couple of months, and then came back and got back into doing comping on some shows, and that's what I'm doing at the moment.
That's
Um,
cool. I was
uh,
curious. Fury 7. What did you do on that?
Furious 7. Let's see. That was a lot of the digidouble work for
Hmm.
Paul Walker, to finish the movie after his passing.
Yeah. So, like, what was that like? Like, what was it like when the job initially came in? Did you think like, yeah, right, this is not going to be something easy to achieve, or?
Um, it had, yeah. It's like this will be hard. Like this won't be like a run of the mill. Just throw some lights in and get it looking okay. Like this will
Hmm.
be something that,
3-point lighting setup done.
yeah,
Next.
this will be something that will take a lot of work from everyone, from Anim, getting the performance just right, to shaders getting the shading of the skin and how the blood moves under the skin when you make an expression, to lighting, just sort of getting it to match the reference plate, and then, but actually also just make it look a little better, but still make it look like Paul Walker, but and then the comping, getting it in there so it sits in there properly and doesn't look out of place when it cuts with the next shot, which may actually have um,
Hmm.
Paul
Paul Walker
Walker
in it.
in there. So it was pretty challenging, that one. Not much in the way of like creativity, because you're
Obviously,
very
yeah.
much matching the thing, but satisfying when you actually you get it and everyone's like, yep, that's yeah. Who would know on this shot?
Yeah,
That
so what was it like in reviews? Like when you started to see the shots come together, like was it pretty mind blowing to
some
kind
of
of?
them, yeah, some of them are pretty like, wow, that looks. You would never tell. Like even in the early renders, some would be spot on, and then other ones would be something would be wrong. Excuse me.
Hmm.
Something would be wrong, but you wouldn't easily tell what it is. So you'd
Yeah.
scrutinize the raw plate, and then you get to that thing where, because in the raw plate, they would use, I think they used either one or both of his brothers most of the
Yeah.
time. But the faces are obviously different shapes. So what looks good on the real footage on his brother, exact same perfect lighting that matches up, doesn't look good on the CG
Hmm.
version of Paul. So you got to then kind of tweak it, but yeah, not tweak it too much to make it different. So
That's going to be
uh,
the tricky thing is that yeah, I mean, looking at something that has to be so real and knowing like, okay, like to me this is real, but it's not, like what is it? Because you're right, like you could kind of go down the wrong path 1,000 times trying to figure out like the subtlety, and that's the worst part, I think, would be making a shot end up worse than better, just trying to figure out like that little thing that you need to impact it with.
yeah.
Was there any, I don't know. I'm kind of fascinated by that subject, just because, again, it was so invisible. I think for many people, they weren't aware of it. And you'd look at, let's say, some of the CG human work that had been done prior to that. I mean, I think of Terminator Salvation, which had the first digital Arnie, which I felt like Arnie in the 80s is a bit more forgivable because he kind of looks like he's made of plastic,
Yeah.
but it still doesn't really hold up too well. But to look at that, obviously it's a little bit later, but it's pretty impressive that you guys were able to take on something that kind of mind-blowing to try and create something that's real, but it's also got to be that subtle that people aren't picking up on it. It's not going to be one of those uncanny valley situations where you're like, what's wrong with the shot? It's got to be, it can't take you out of the movie.
Yeah, I think it's just that's part of some of Weta's strengths, though, is they're obviously a very good creature company with like apes and dragons and all that sort of stuff. And then the soup on that show, Martin Hill, is very much he's an excellent sort of technical guy, like a shaders guy, like so it was a lot of like, this is a render of Paul's head, and we have to tweak this bit of the shader to make the the color be slightly different. Like, it was all very precise in that regard. And I think it's just like, you take on a show like this, it's obviously it's very challenging and risky, I guess. Like, as if it didn't work, it'd be a bit of a disaster. But you build up the company's skill set over all these particular movies, and then you probably it's wise to take on these specific challenges when you think you've done all your homework and your practice, and now it's time to take on this super challenge. And I think everyone did a fantastic job, and you'd never tell. You'd never tell that was the case. And there was, the time was given as well. Everyone makes fun of Justice League and Superman's mustache removal, but that was probably also not given the time that it could have had to have been perfect. Fast and Furious had a deadline, but it was a good broad amount of time to allow everyone to do the job properly, and we got heaps of reference material during the shoot, so it was not unplanned. It was like perfectly planned out, and given all the resources and time it needed to do it properly.
No, it looks amazing. And just curious, like, what was the time frame for those Paul Walker shots when they came in from start to finish?
I feel like it was a good 6 month sort of project for most people, but I don't really remember or know the exact timeline, because that would have been that thing of we're going to, like, I'm guessing the client would have been like, we've got to finish this movie somehow. How are we going to do it? Okay, we're going to do all these reshoots, and we're going to get Weta to do
Jar
this.
Binks and
stuff. Jada's going to stand in here, and we're going to do all these things, and it's like, okay, Weta's going to do these shots with Paul. What do you need from us to do this properly? And from that point, Weta would have been working on the various assets, of course, and doing all their tests. So you would have had heaps of time to get the tech working. And I think the shots, I think everyone had, a little handful of shots that they just sort of focused on until they got it right. So it was long shots for, like a small part of the frame. You're working on it for a very long time, but just had to do it that way.
That's great. And one or two more things, but as you mentioned Justice League, I'm curious, like, what did you do on that shot? On that show. You're comp lead on that, right?
The last few shows I've been a tech lead, which is sort of, I've been looking after various tech things on shows, like testing templates for comp setups and ways to automate certain tasks with some of the tools we have in-house. We've got to send stuff to stereo conversion companies, so there's a whole workflow for that needs a bit of support. Particle setups, all sorts of random things. But on that show in particular, the sort of sequences that I worked on was like the history lesson, which was the whole Steppenwolf fighting the Amazonians and the armies of men. And then there was some stuff in the mother box chamber on the the island of the Amazonians. So it was more supporting the team, coming up with setups and templates and doing the odd shot here or there, kind of like as a look dev type role.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And I am curious. I have to dig more into the CG mustache stuff. I mean, that was Weta as well, right? Doing the CG. No, it wasn't. Who was that?
No idea.
Because I remember reading up on it, because it's just such a fascinating subject, and I remember reading up on it at one point, because I know that the initial shot, the first shot in the movie, was done by some other studio, a different studio to all the other ones, and that's why I thought it was fascinating, because the first shot is terribly bad, but it just kind of completely, if that shot wasn't in there, you wouldn't probably have picked up on it as obviously, but that kind of like just had arrows basically pointing at the mouth for the rest of the film. So yeah, I was just kind of curious, like I'll have to dig that up to see which studio did the majority of the face replacements, because it's such a, I don't know, I mean the whole story in general is just amazing, that you got two studios kind of battling over this stupid contract about someone has facial hair, and we'll pay to to add hair onto the other person's face, and they're like, no, you can remove it from your movie.
Yeah, it's like pick the worst option possible.
Yeah, well, I think it's very
right.
I think it's very clear that I keep forgetting. I think it was Paramount. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Paramount were the ones doing Mission Impossible, and they're the ones just purposely making it difficult for what movie? Warner Brothers. Yeah, so it would have been Warner Brothers that would have been asking Paramount to let them shave the face. But yeah, I mean, I've watched like a lot of stuff on YouTube, things like that, where people are like, oh, it's so easy to add that or do that. But I mean, you are essentially doing a CG face for adding facial hair. It's not like you're just adding a mustache back in, which I think a lot of people kind of oversimplify it with. But yeah, I just think in general, like that whole discussion is just, it's pretty amazing to see that kind of stuff going on.
And unfortunately for Justice League, I think the fact that everyone made such a thing about it beforehand, and then the only image I think I ever saw, online and various blogs or whatever, with a photo of his face, was a wacky, distorted version of it as well. So like, it was shot on like a curved screen off to the side, so his jaw looked enormously deformed, like just from the camera. So I don't think that helped the case.
That's from the beginning of the film. Like that was done by a different studio that I think it's like a rush pickup job that I don't know the full story, but I do know that was a separate studio, and it's so much more obvious, which is, it's worse because it sets the tone of like, hey, let's look at this guy's face for the whole film, and it's distracting. You can't enjoy the film. Not that there's much to enjoy in that film, but just because you're looking at the dude's face the whole time, And yeah, I mean, because you watch like Rogue One, and I don't know, for me, I'm more kind of nerding out, except for Princess Leia, I didn't particularly like, but just seeing all the other characters is really cool, and a majority of them are invisible. You don't even pick up that they are CG, with the exception of I forgot the actor's name, but yeah, the main character. But yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty fascinating now that we are at a point where it isn't a gimmick to throw a CG character in. It's more now like, let's try and do it in a way that is either respectful or it's seamless in the film, and we're getting close. It's still not quite there, but the fact that people are trying to do it in serious films now, I mean, we're definitely getting closer.
No, it's good to see regular films become a bit more adventurous with things like that. And yeah, awesome. Being seamless is cool, and helps,
Just blame the compositor. So what's next for you? I mean, obviously, I mean, I think it's kind of funny. I didn't realize it had been 15 years since we last caught up. But yeah, I mean, for you at this point, you're pretty settled in New Zealand, or?
Yeah, I mean, 2 kids and mortgage and
you're stuck.
all that sort of stuff, But one thing that going to Singapore did sort of make pretty clear, and I spent a bit of time in Melbourne afterwards, sort of seeing what work was around in there, is that Weta and Wellington is pretty sweet place. Like, you can live anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes away from Weta, and it's not the commute is super easy compared to any other place in the world, and the environment is really quite nice. The weather is pretty good. It's not blazingly hot all the time like it is in Singapore. It's a bit more on the windy and rainy, but it's actually can be quite nice for a lot of the year, and just the people are really cool, and the environment's really good. So kind of enjoying being here and the ease of being here. And having the two kids, it's easy to get home for dinner or help out in an emergency
Mm.
when they're being absolute monsters. And um, where I wouldn't be able to do that anywhere else. If I was in like London, it'd
Yeah,
be a two-hour
that's
two-hour
right.
train ride home kind of thing. Or Vancouver is probably in the 45 minutes to an hour type thing.
Yeah,
Melbourne's the same.
Vancouver at least is small. It's kind of like San Fran in the sense that it's pretty self-contained. It's only if you are like Burnaby or Victoria. Like if you want to live in more affordable areas, then it's like an hour out. But otherwise, like if you're actually in Vancouver, then it's pretty tiny itself, which is kind of cool because it means you can get anywhere in about 15 minutes, opposed to like LA where it's like everything's 2 hours.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Uh,
But no, that's cool. And like I guess I always find it fascinating. Like, what's your take on Wellington? Just because of Weta, it's such an international crowd. So I mean, I don't think there's many places you can go that, especially New Zealand in general, just being such a quiet place. And then there, it's just 50% American, and every other nation is there as well. I mean, for you guys, is it kind of a bit odd that everyone in that city essentially is working at Weta and from a different location?
yeah, it's yeah, I don't know what the breakdown of the nationalities is anymore. It used to be, yeah, really like Digi was like, you know, really heavily biased towards the US and the UK. But I think now it is pretty diverse, both because of the number of people and a conscious decision, I think, by Weta to start sort of training up locals.
Hmm.
So I really quite like the diversity because you never know where anyone's from or where they're going. There's all sorts of different accents and sensibilities there at the moment, and everyone's got their passion outside of work. That's always interesting to talk about, and the city's pretty good, like pretty good and friendly, and they quite enjoy. I think having most of the time having Weta here. There's a lot of car parking spaces that get used up by Weta Digital, but
Yeah.
uh, it's a great company to have in the city. And over the years, just sort of seeing the suburb that Weta Digital is in sort of slowly improve. Like the supermarket got better, and there's a couple of really nice cafes and restaurants in there now. An old cinema that was left derelict for years has been rejuvenated and is now a really nice sort of deco cinema.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's quite a cool place to be. And then you got easy access to skiing. Not as easy as like Vancouver, from what I hear, but a few mountains around.
it's kind
Queenstown's
of
nearby.
it's kind of funny because Whistler, that's where all the skiing is. Like that's pretty much all Australians, just because obviously when everyone leaves Australia, they're under 32. They can get a work permit in the Commonwealth pretty easily. So it's either London or you go to Whistler. So yeah, it's like everyone up there. Like no one has like legitimate jobs. It's all working at a supermarket or working the slopes somewhere. So it seems like Aussies are kind of more conditioned to work in those kind of places.
Yeah. So yeah, it's good. I quite like the town. I'd like some more shows or concerts to come through, but
Yeah.
if you really want to see something, you just have to go to Auckland or Australia for it, I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true. At least it's only 3 hours flight to Australia.
yeah.
That's cool, man. Again, thank you for taking the time to chat. And just before we wrap it up, I mean, I guess I'm kind of curious too. Like, is there, from a compositing or lighting perspective, like, is there any new tech or other things like that that you've been kind of excited or seeing kind of pop into the scene, either in film or AR, VR games, whatever? Use that gaming headset of yours.
Yeah. There's a few things. I'd echo what you've said in previous podcasts way back in the day when I think you went early on, where it's like coding is something that
Thank you. I
pays
completely
off
forgot. Yeah.
big time, because I've always been interested in reusing my sort of long forgotten rusty coding background.
Hmm.
So I think over the last year, I've sort of really sort of made conscious decisions to use Python more and more and more, and I found that really both fun and really helpful to be able to automate things and just generate random things. So I'm trying to keep that going because that applies to everything. Like I use that at home even to automate a few things here or there on my own sort of computer system. But I'm really interested in what Unreal and Unity are doing. Their sort of real-time rendering. Obviously there was that ray tracing thing from GDC a couple of weeks ago. It was quite cool to see. But just it's sort of like I look at demos of the features in Unreal, and they throw lights in and they spin them around, and they have this really complex looking forest vegetation with volumetric fog and everything in there. And
it's amazing.
It's real time and it looks great. I'd really like to just be able to do that in Nuke or whatever, or Maya or whatnot. Because I think to me the biggest hurdle for me for making cool pictures is just the feedback loop and the time it takes to render. Even though like comp is pretty fast these days, it's still like the shot I'm working on at the moment is like I do all the little bits separately, pre-comp them out so that each part renders out in like 5 minutes or something like that. But it still takes could take half an hour before you see what it looks like all rendered out. So I quite like that, and because I have no spare time, I'm also interested in deep learning and things like that. I'm just interested in lots of things that I never have time to look at.
Thanks for bringing that up, by the way. I completely forgot about. I wanted to ask you about coding, just because, again, like you coming from having a coding background, like how you whether or not you're kind of applying that to what you're doing these days. Because again, like Nuke is one of those things that you can be very creative with it, but it's also a very technical tool, and you've got all that power there if you want to really automate a lot of what you're doing and really build up a strong workflow to allow you to get things done. And so I mean, having that power and that flexibility to build everything out with Python and everything else, definitely is a huge benefit.
I think it took me a while to actually do it, mostly because I think I was, for whatever reason, I was a bit like, I don't know, tired or afraid, even like, what if I can never figure it out? But it's kind of like, it's like a really, it's really easy in Nuke to do stuff with Python. And you just have a web browser open and you just search on Google for what you want to do, and somebody's already done it. So you just copy that, paste it in, change the things a little bit, and then, away you go. And you just start on something simple, like I got to disable all these nodes, or I want to put an expression in all these blurs. And it's like 2 lines to do that, and it saves you, 2 minutes of manually doing it. And then you go, I could really do all these things automatically that I usually do.
Yeah, and that 2 minutes is 2 minutes for every single time you need to do it for the rest of your life, which ends up being hours or days. So it's really cool, man. Well, again, thanks for taking the time to chat, and like we definitely got to catch up soon. So I haven't actually, I've been down to Australia once in like the last 10 years. So it's any day now. I keep getting people asking all the time, when are you coming down? So I don't know, like very soon I'm gonna have to make my way down there, and so many people that I know up here are all at Weta these days. So I know at some point I'm gonna have to detour over there for a little bit and spend a couple of days. So we'll definitely have to tear up the town and get some drinks if there's time in between kids, wife, and Weta.
I don't think you'll have any trouble finding anyone to hang out with here.
Yeah, there's a lot of drinkers over there, that's for sure. I actually found like a bar named Maya in Wellington at one point, which I thought was hilarious, because we're walking down the street and I'm like, holy shit, there's a bar here. I think it was like an ice bar as well, which was kind of cool. But yeah, it's called Maya. I'm like, all right, what are the odds? But cool, man. Well, again, thanks so much. And if anyone wants to track you down online, like where can they reach you?
I have a randomly updated webpage at cameronsmith.info.
Cool.
But too busy to do anything about that too.
Yeah, finding time is always the hard part. Cool, man. Well, thanks again, man. And then let's catch up soon. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks again to Cameron for taking the time to chat. Hopefully this shed a lot of light in terms of his journey, his career, but also just a lot of really great high-value information coming from a very experienced compositor on a lot of really cool subjects. That being said, I'll be back next week. In the meantime, like I said, if you want to get the show notes, go to allanmckay.com/163. And in addition to that, like I said, get the Ultimate Demo Reel book, as well as the free 2-hour masterclass and all of the other free videos and other high-value content that comes with it. All free. Go to allanmckay.com/myreel. Okay, I'll be back next week. Until then, rock on.